Inside the hypostyle hall at Karnak, Luxor, 134 sandstone columns rise to a height of 23 meters. Every surface of every column is carved with the same name: Amun. The innermost sanctuary behind those columns remained sealed to non-priests for 3,200 years. That name, not a translation of it, not a symbol for it, the exact phoneme, now passes through 2.4 billion Christian mouths every single week. The seal placed in that stone is still active. The consent is still being given. In 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea moved against a body of texts circulating through early Christian communities. Banned, cataloged as heresy, ordered destroyed. The communities that carried them buried what they could. Around 367 CE, near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, someone sealed 52 documents inside a clay jar and covered it with earth. They stayed there for 15 centuries. In 1945, a farmer's mattock struck the jar. The texts came back into the light. 52 documents. That number matters, because among them are prayer texts, ritual instructions, and name invocations that the church had specifically moved to erase. Not obscure poetry, not allegory. Functional, liturgical documents that name the entity being addressed when a specific phoneme is spoken, and describe the mechanism by which that address is made. In the next several minutes, you will see the original etymology of that phoneme traced to its Egyptian root, the exact Gnostic ritual context in which it was deployed, and the specific name the texts assign to the one receiving spoken consent every time it leaves a human mouth. This channel surfaces what was sealed. Every week, a document, a suppressed lineage, a buried record, examined without apology, without softening, without the academic hedging designed to keep you at arm's length from the primary source. If that is the history you want to see, subscribe now, because what comes next in this record is not a theory. The Egyptian hieroglyphic root is rendered in transliteration as Im-En. The determinative glyph attached to it is a seated man with his hand raised to conceal his face. E. A. Wallace Budge, in his 1904 work, The Gods of the Egyptians, published by Open Court in Chicago, translates the root with precision. That which is hidden. Not hidden in the sense of misplaced, hidden in the sense of structurally concealed from those without authorized access. Budge was keeper of Egyptian and Assyrian antiquities at the British Museum. His translation has not been revised by any subsequent Egyptological consensus. The word means what he said it means. In the outer courts of Karnak, the name Amun was not spoken aloud. This was not custom. It was law. Priests in the inner sanctuary held the name as an active instrument. To speak it in an unauthorized context was to misuse the instrument. The name carried a directional function. It addressed the hidden one, and in addressing him, it completed a circuit. Now hold that architecture in mind. A name that means hidden. A name restricted to initiated use. A name that functions as an address to a concealed entity. And then consider what Hebrew scribes working in Egypt during the period of Israelite captivity returned home carrying. The phoneme Amen appears in Hebrew liturgical use no later than the 6th century BCE. It appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls, across multiple manuscripts, including those cataloged under the prefix 4Q at the Israel Antiquities Authority. It appears as a spoken response, a ratification, a consent seal at the end of a spoken invocation. The scribes gave no etymology for it. They offered no translation. They carried the phoneme intact, exact, unmodified, from the banks of the Nile into the liturgical structure of a different tradition. He had no way to know, except that he did, because the knowledge was not accidental. The transfer was direct. The phoneme was not borrowed as a word with a meaning. It was borrowed as a functional instrument with an address. The Catholic Encyclopedia, in its entry on Amen, acknowledges, without elaboration, that the term appears identically in Gnostic ritual texts. The editors describe this as a coincidence of usage. They do not pursue it. They do not explain why a word of Hebrew affirmation would appear, phoneme identical, in Egyptian mystery religion, in Gnostic liturgical documents, and in the weekly spoken practice of 2.4 billion people, performing the same closing function in every context. Ratifying, sealing, directing the invocation to its address. The Nag Hammadi text, known as the Prayer of the Apostle Paul, recovered in Codex I, the Jung Codex, now held at the Coptic Museum in Cairo, uses the phoneme not as a punctuation mark. It uses it as a name, a direct address. The prayer does not close with Amen as an expression of agreement. It closes with Amen as the name of the one being spoken to. The distinction is not minor. It is the entire mechanism. The ancients built 134 columns to hold his name in stone. They sealed the inner sanctuary against unauthorized approach. They understood that the name was not decorative. It was directional. The Church calls it punctuation. And that gap between what the stone records and what the pulpit teaches is exactly where this record goes next. Nag Hammadi, Egypt, December 1945. A farmer digging near the base of a cliff strikes a sealed ceramic jar. Inside, 13 leather-bound codices, papyrus pages, Coptic script, documents the early church had declared destroyed. The first tractate of the first codex is now catalogued as NHL Codex I, Tractate I. It is held at the Coptic Museum in Cairo. The standard English translation was produced by Dieter Müller and George McCrae, published in the definitive Nag Hammadi Library edition under James Robinson in 1977. Its title is The Prayer of the Apostle Paul. It is 47 lines long. It closes with a single word. That word is Amen. Now, here is what the mainstream reading skips entirely. The prayer does not address the God of the New Testament. It addresses the pleroma, the Gnostic term for the fullness of divine light that exists above and prior to the material world. It invokes what the text calls the Hidden One, the one who cannot be named by the demiurge, the one whose light the lower creator cannot access or replicate. And then it seals that invocation with Amen. The Coptic term used is the direct transliteration, Amen. No translation offered, no footnote explaining its function. Because the 2nd century Gnostics who composed this text did not need a footnote. They knew precisely what current that word opened. They were not using it as punctuation. They were using it as a key, fitted to a specific lock, aimed at a specific frequency of power. This is where the impossible knowledge beat lands. These communities had no access to the Egyptian temple records at Karnak. The priesthood of Amun had been dismantled for centuries. The hieroglyphic inscriptions naming the Hidden One, the concealed God, the one whose true form cannot be seen, were buried under Roman construction and Coptic plaster. And yet, the 2nd century Gnostic communities of Egypt preserved the functional use of the seal word with precision that matches the temple theology beat for beat. The Hidden One, the unnamed, the one who dwells in light inaccessible. That is Amun. That is the referent the Karnak inscriptions encode. And that is the entity the prayer of the Apostle Paul is directing the seal toward. The Church inherited the word. It stripped the referent. It kept the seal operational and pointed it at a general divine address, a liturgical blank space, while the word itself continued functioning exactly as it was designed to function. Now bring this forward 18 centuries. Biblical scholars working with the Robinson translation have noted since 1977 that the pleroma invocations in Nag Hammadi texts carry a structural precision that differs categorically from the rote closings of mainstream liturgy. Dr. Elaine Pagels, whose 1979 work, The Gnostic Gospels, remains the field's entry point, describes the Gnostic prayer tradition as intentional and technically precise. The practitioner was expected to know what they were addressing before they sealed the address. That is not how Amen is taught in any Sunday school in the world today. The gap between those two uses is not a matter of translation drift. It is not a matter of cultural evolution. The 2nd century communities were using a precision instrument. The modern congregation is using the same instrument with the targeting system removed. The word still transmits. The address has been obscured. And here is what makes this record impossible to set aside. The Lord's Prayer, the most recited sequence of words in the history of Christianity, ends the same way.
Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why I started the Gnostic newsletter, a free newsletter where I go deeper into esoteric Gnostic teachings, hidden wisdom, and the mysteries we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive a Gnostic guide to mastering reality as a welcome gift, completely free. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that.
The same seal, the same closing word, spoken by billions of people, every week, every Sunday, in every language, into an address that has never been named from the pulpit. The Gnostics knew who they were talking to when they said it. The question is whether you do. And what the etymological record reveals about why that knowledge was specifically, deliberately, and measurably removed, that is where this goes next. In 2021, AFP Fact Check published an explicit debunking of the claim that the word Amen derives from the Egyptian god Amun. The article labels the connection false. It cites no primary linguistic sources. It references no manuscript tradition. It names no etymologist. That article now ranks on the first page of search results for the query. Here is what it does not cite. The Jewish Encyclopedia, the 1906 reference work compiled by Isidore Singer and a team of 12 scholars across 4 continents, contains an entry on the root Aleph Mem Nun. It acknowledges directly that Amon, Amun, and Amen share a single phonetic root structure. The consonantal skeleton is identical, A, M, N. Unvoweled, they are the same word. The Jewish Encyclopedia does not draw a theological conclusion from this. It simply records the philological fact. The AFP Fact Check does not mention the Jewish Encyclopedia. Not once. Now unpack the original language structure. In Hebrew, the root Aleph Mem Nun carries the sense of something firm, established, reliable, something that holds. In Egyptian, Amun derives from the root Im, meaning the hidden one, the concealed, the one whose true nature cannot be perceived. Both roots share the same consonantal skeleton. Both carry the sense of something foundational that cannot be directly seen or named. That is not coincidence. That is a shared linguistic inheritance from a period before the two traditions formally separated, a period most mainstream scholarship does not have a clean date for, because the evidence for early Hebrew-Egyptian contact is itself contested, suppressed, and selectively cited. Here is the impossible knowledge beat. The communities that composed the Nag Hammadi texts, living in Roman Egypt in the 2nd century, would have had no formal access to comparative Semitic linguistics as a discipline. That field did not exist. And yet their use of Amen as a precision seal, aimed at a hidden pleromic entity, matches the Egyptian theological function of Amun with an accuracy that formal linguistics took until the 20th century to map. They were not guessing. They were transmitting. Now measure the suppression. 0. That is the number of mainstream liturgical sources, catechisms, official prayer books, denominational guides, Vatican documents, that name the Egyptian referent when teaching the use of Amen. 0 named the Aleph Mem Nun root in the context of its Egyptian cognate. The firewall is not partial. It is total. And it was not discovered through scholarship. It was constructed, deliberately, incrementally, across centuries of institutional editing, to protect something the texts call liturgical consent. The demiurge system, as described in the Nag Hammadi literature, requires agreement from the practitioner. Not informed agreement, sealed, unconscious agreement. The word functions as a binding close, a ratification of whatever address preceded it. If the practitioner does not know the address, the seal still holds. The consent is still recorded. The transmission still completes. This is why the firewall had to be total. A partial suppression would leave room for the question. A practitioner who knew even half of the etymological record might pause before the closing word, might redirect, might consciously name a different address before sealing it. The AFP fact check ensures that pause never happens. It labels the question false before the question can fully form. That is not journalism. That is architecture. But here is what makes this stranger than any suppression argument alone. The seal does not require your knowledge to function. The Gnostic texts are explicit on this point. The word operates on the quality of the close, not the conscious intention of the speaker. You can say it in ignorance. You can say it in sleep. You can say it in a language you do not understand. And the seal still runs. Which means the redirection protocol, the one the Gnostic communities actually used, requires something more specific than simply knowing the history. And that is exactly what the oldest surviving text on this subject describes in precise, recoverable detail. Nag Hammadi Codex 13 contains a single tractate. Its title, preserved in Coptic, translates as Trimorphic Protonoia, the three-formed first thought. The manuscript is held at the Coptic Museum in Cairo. The critical English translation was produced by John D. Turner and published in the Robinson Nag Hammadi Library Edition in 1977. Turner's translation remains the standard academic reference. The text opens with a voice speaking in first person. It identifies itself as the thought that dwells in the light, the primal light, the one that existed before the demiurge constructed the material frame. It says explicitly, "I am the light that illumines the all. I dwell in the inaccessible white." That phrase, inaccessible light, is the Coptic term Feng Meth, literally, the light that cannot be known by the lower powers, the archons, the administrators of the material system. The text names the current explicitly. It does not use a hidden title. It does not encode the address in symbol. It states the source and states the direction. This is the impossible knowledge beat. The second century communities composing this text had no access to quantum field theory. They had no vocabulary for directed, coherent energy. And yet, the trimorphic protonoia describes what modern consciousness researchers at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, in work published between 2008 and 2019, have begun to map as intentional attention fields. Directed quality of awareness producing measurable, non-local effects. The ancients called it pleromic intent. We call it coherent conscious attention. Same phenomenon, different century. Now the practical protocol the text actually delivers. The Gnostic communities who used this text did not simply know the history of the seal word. They redirected it. Before the closing seal, before Amen, they named the light current explicitly, not as a theological statement, as a technical address. They spoke the name of the light of lights. They directed conscious, awakened attention toward the pleroma source. And then they sealed it. That sequence matters. Name the address, direct the attention, then close. In that order, the seal does not ratify an unconscious consent to the demiurge system. It ratifies a conscious, directed transmission to the pleromic current the archons cannot access. The text describes this as bypassing the harvest channel entirely. The archonic system, as trimorphic protanoia frames it, collects the energy of unconscious closure, sealed agreement from practitioners who do not know what they are agreeing to. Redirect the address before the seal, make it conscious, make it named, make it aimed at the inaccessible light, and the harvest channel receives nothing. The monad, the text is careful to note, receives no phoneme. It does not receive the sound of the word. It receives the quality of the attention behind it. Awakened attention directed toward the inaccessible light. That is the transmission the system was designed to carry. And this is the record the institutional church had to bury. Not the word itself. The word was too embedded to remove. The protocol, the sequence, the instruction that turns a rote closing into a precision redirect. That is what was stripped. That is what the tractates preserve. But the trimorphic protanoia does not stop at the protocol. It names what the hidden one, the concealed pleromic source, cannot be touched by, what the archonic system has no authority over, what remains intact regardless of how many centuries the seal has been misdirected. And that record is still there, checkable, in Cairo, today. The Nag Hammadi codices sit in the Coptic Museum in Cairo right now. Case 4, ground floor, publicly accessible. The Karnak inscription of Amun's hidden name is still carved into stone, verifiable, in person, today. And 2.4 billion people speak the seal every single week. Most have never been told the referent. That is not history. That is a present tense mechanism. The consent channel opened centuries ago, and no one closed it. It is still running. Every Sunday, every service, every closing word. The hidden one still receives the agreement. Quietly, continuously, from billions who were never shown what they were agreeing to. If this changes how you hear that word, say so below. And if hidden cosmology moves you, subscribe. We go deeper every week.